Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain. And I'm really excited because today, for the first time ever, Let's Talk Supply Chain and SupplyChainBrain have joined forces to bring you an exclusive collaboration. And if that wasn't enough, we're also joined by the leading parcel shipping intelligence platform, and that is Reveel. And we have Chad Bevill, co-founder and president, and Michael Falls, vice president of client success, here with us today. And today we're talking all about parcel shipping in style. So we are going to explore Reveel's cutting-edge parcel spend optimization solutions and talk about how they are transforming the landscape of the apparel and fashion industry, helping organizations to save costs, boost profitability, and enhance operations. And so we're going to be having a Q&A later on in this webinar, and we want to hear from you. So we want your questions. If you have a question already, fantastic. Just pop them into the Q&A function. And as we get talking and questions pop up, we are going to be addressing that at the end of our discussion today. So now with the e-commerce boom, Amazon effect, and increasingly demanding customers, we've really seen issues around last mile and parcel shipping enter the spotlight, particularly when it comes to cost. Last year, parcel shipping costs were estimated at over $217 billion. And over the past 5 years, parcel costs have risen by 13.7% on average. And despite slightly decreasing demand compared with pandemic levels, parcel costs remain high. So what can retailers do to reduce those costs yet still deliver the experience that customers have come to expect? Well, today we're going to dive deep into how you can gain the insights you need into how to negotiate advantageous terms, conditions, and rates with carriers and secure a robust foundation for your shipping operations. And we're going to explore how to harness the power of data so that you can make data-driven decisions that empower your team and drive profitability and operational efficiency. So are you ready to transform your parcel shipping? Well, I know I am. So get out your pen and paper so you can take some notes. And with me today are Chad and Michael. Chad and Michael, welcome.
Hi,
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to be here.
Yeah, great to see you. All right, let's start the discussion because we have so much to talk about. Let's start by talking about that delicate balance between retailers and carriers when it comes to negotiation, because there's so much to think about, right? But it's incredibly important for retailers to get it right. So Chad, I'm going to start with you. Can you share with us why you decided to take a tech-focused approach to parcel spend management?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Great question. So, I mean, this is going to come off kind of simple, but ultimately we listen to the market. So we spent the first decade or so as a business operating more in that managed service space, or what a lot of those out there will think of as the consulting space. And we did that for, about a decade or so. And I think it was a great approach over the last few decades. But then with the rise of technology over the last few years, we've been receiving feedback over and over again from our customers and companies that we speak with that they really want to have access to the same tools that, the consulting space have had at their fingertips so that they can directly manage this experience on their own and not have to wait on people to get back to them when they want an answer. They want to have it real time, 24/7 access. And so it's also, similar to over the years, how the carriers or shippers, I guess, have really diversified their carrier mix and wanted more options. Likewise, they've also wanted more options when they rely on a vendor to help support those needs as well. So that's what we did. We spent the last 5 years building out a new tech product that we just released a couple of years ago. We interviewed over 300 customers to really understand what the market was looking for as far as feature sets go. And then we developed it. And so we're very excited, and we've been receiving a lot of great feedback in the market as we push this out to the market. And we're really excited to share it with those on the call today.
Yeah, so excited that you did that market research. You talked to 300 people. I mean, that's a lot of people to really talk to find out what it is that they want from you and then create what people are actually looking for. So kudos on that. So Michael, you've been in the industry a while as well. Could you share a little bit more about your background and why you decided to join Reveel?
Yeah, definitely. So I joined Reveel last year after spending about a decade in the transportation spend management space with a company called Invista, where I led client success for their global freight audit and payment solution for many years. And about a year and a half ago, the product I supported was acquired. So I made the decision to leave the organization, but really wanted to stay in the space and continue to support kind of shippers in a parcel spend management capacity. So, it was interesting because after so many years in the space, my perception was really that kind of all the lead players were kind of slightly different flavors of the same parcel spend management variety, kind of like a technology enabled managed service, like what Chad described. But primarily with, a focus on audit, BI, contract strategy that they kind of differed in slightly different ways. And, I remember a few years ago, Gartner, when they were doing their market guide, they basically said, hey, audit and payment technology hasn't really evolved that much in really a decade, right? And that had been my experience. So the more I explored, the more I learned that experience was correct. But I found one exception, right? And that exception was Reveel. And the more I got to know the company, the more I really found that Reveel was playing just a totally different game, right? By focusing on technological advancements that were completely changing things for their customers through modeling and simulation and data science and machine learnings and the outcomes that were being achieved through those technological advancements. It really just made Reveel the place that I wanted to spend the next season of my career.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Now, you also talk with customers every day in your role at Reveel. And as we enter this discussion, what are some of the challenges and maybe issues facing shippers in the retail and apparel industry today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I know we've got obviously a lot of people part of the discussion here who face a wide variety of challenges. There are a lot, and the list is growing. I was thinking, kind of entering today's discussion about some of our apparel and fashion shipper customers at Reveel, and trying to pin down like what's the one primary objective, right? That's like unifying, and the reality is they all have different kind of primary objectives in their engagement with Reveel. For one of our established apparel manufacturers, their objective is we've got to optimize our contract strategy for our newly negotiated carrier agreements. We have another customer who's a high-end fashion brand. They're focused on really achieving full data visibility for the first time for them to kind of a wide carrier base and an international geographic footprint. For another really fast-growing athletic fashion brand, it's achieving real-time visibility and accurate data for their finance teams, especially for the purpose of accrual reporting. So, those are some of the common themes. But when you really think about what shippers are coming into today's conversations with, right, and the challenges that they're facing, it's a long list, right? It's balancing cost optimization versus on-time performance. It's managing spend and performance across a variety of sales channels and fulfillment channels and across a diversifying carrier network. It's managing multiple systems, right? A TMS, an OMS, parcel audit and analytics. It's returns, it's employee turnover, it's vendor issues. It's attempting to reduce or eliminate repetitive tasks. So, it's really a long list of challenges. And, I hope that during this conversation, we can help provide solutions to a lot of those.
Yeah. So many disruptions to think about as well. So you've got a long list of challenges, plus there's those disruptions that we've been hearing about as well. And everybody's supply chain or their last mile delivery is very unique to their particular organization. So Chad, in the retail and fashion industry, what specific factors do you think that businesses should consider when negotiating some of those terms and rates with carriers to optimize those shipping operations? Sometimes we don't put those two together. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so depending on their go-to-market strategy, it'll vary. So we have some fashion brands that really have a focus on direct to consumer. We have other brands that do direct to consumer and also ship to retail. And so depending on that will vary. And so the ones that are doing mostly B2C, direct to consumer, they really want to pay close attention to all the accessorial charges that get added to those invoices. For example, residential delivery area surcharge, there's an extended one, the Saturday delivery, and then also during holiday peak, there's additional surcharges that come into play depending on volume. And so in addition to that, depending on the profile of those shipments, if they're lightweight packages, that really opens them up to additional carriers outside of the traditional national carriers. For example, DHL Ecom has a strong product offering for those lightweight packages, as well as the Postal Service just opened up that new service with Ground Advantage. And so we've seen a lot of companies taking advantage of those as well. For the brands that are doing more of the, direct to like retailers, those like larger shipments, then there's outside of the national carriers, you also have some of these bigger regionals. With the merger of LaserShip and OnTrack, they now have coverage of 80% of the United States population. So that's become like a really great player in the space and given shippers, a lot of options there as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing you didn't mention was oversize too, right? The size of the package does matter, and it really reflects on shipping optimization, but also helping to negotiate those terms and understanding what that actually means. So now, Michael, I'm going to go back to you. Can you share some of the insights on how data analysis can help retailers and fashion brands sort of identify the opportunities for optimization and cost savings in their shipping processes through agreement monitoring? Because sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I know we'll talk a lot about data analytics today, but it's that piece of agreement monitoring, right? That it was one of the first things that really piqued my interest when I was getting introduced to Reveel, right? Because it's one thing for a shipper to do what Chad just described and negotiate great carrier rates and plan a really robust network strategy based on those negotiated rates. But it can be a lot to stay on top of, right? I mean, anyone who's dealt with parcel contracts knows, right? I mean, just managing to the contract through the complexity is really challenging. And so that's where Reveel's agreement monitoring feature really eliminates the complexity for shippers and peace of mind. And so, a few of the things that we really help our customers monitor as it comes to their agreements. Number one would just be expiring terms, right? Even if the contract isn't expiring, there could be terms, specifically discounts that were negotiated that could be expiring. So just being on top of those, knowing when they're going to expire, working with carriers to create addendums, that's really important. Another one is revenue tiers, right? Some shippers have negotiated rates and they've planned and budgeted to stay in a specific revenue or volume tier. And if based on any number of factors, right, it could be that just order volume has declined. It could be that the shipper has moved volume to a different carrier for whatever reason. If a shipper is at risk of falling into a lower tier, or alternately, potentially going to move into a higher tier, that's something that you really need to be aware of in terms of how that's going to impact your discounts. And along those same lines, some shippers have negotiated rebates in their contract. And those rebates are based on average net spend over, specific time periods. So those can be material. And for shippers with kind of diverse carrier networks, where there's some complexity to managing volume, it's really important that shippers are managing appropriately to receive those rebates. So those are kind of the top three with agreement monitoring, but there's one that doesn't get recognized as frequently, and it's a really important one, and that's the GRI, right? So I mean, it's well known, right? Every year carriers release the general rate increase. This year it was announced at 5.9%. And I still hear this all the time in conversations. Many shippers don't realize that announced GRI is an average, and it doesn't include specific surcharges, even for shippers with rate caps. And so it's important for shippers to understand what the impact of the GRI is going to be on their specific program, which, our technology re-rates every shipment to the penny to perform that analysis. And, when we perform that analysis across our entire customer base this year, we found that shippers on average are going to take more like an 8% hit for both UPS and FedEx, as opposed to the 5.9%, right? So really important for shippers to understand, what that GRI means for their specific program.
Well, that's 3 to 4% over what's actually been announced, right? And I could only imagine doing all of those things manually. Nobody wants to do those things manually anymore. And so technology is really important. Also to be able to alert you, to say, hey, this is what's coming up, or your discount is expiring. You need to get a meeting in the calendar, right? So what role does customer satisfaction and brand reputation play in monitoring some of those carrier agreements within the retail and apparel sector, Michael?
Yeah, it matters a lot. So when I started, kind of cutting my teeth in the parcel data analytics space a decade or so ago, shippers were really focused more on cost containment, much more than transit performance, right? Especially, 10 years ago, shippers were offering, free shipping. They were experimenting with that. There was a massive shift in the late, kind of 20 teens with what became known as the Amazon effect, and then into into 2020 with the pandemic, where shippers increasingly started to value delivery performance and keeping the promise to their customers over cost containment, right? And so, apparel companies have certainly started to trend that way, where it's balancing cost containment and on-time performance. And, maybe not to the extent that companies with time-critical deliveries, like, medical supplies, might be managing that, but to the point that it matters for their brand reputation and customer sat. And so, what a lot of apparel companies have started to do is make carrier decisions in certain regions based on expected transit time, right? In other words, like shifting volume from one carrier to another for the purpose of improving their on-time performance to customers. And, what that might do is it might actually have a negative unintended consequence on cost, right? In terms of managing your agreement, right? So for example, to the point that we just made, right? If you move volume to have better performance in a certain region, but then you fall out of a revenue tier with a carrier, that could result in losing massive discounts or forfeiting a rebate that was budgeted, right? And we've had that experience with customers. We had one who comes to mind specifically who came to Reveel last year. Our software immediately identified the exact scenario I just described. They were moving volume from one carrier to another. It was going to, from what they expected, reduce cost and improve transit performance to delight their customers. But it was a decision that would have taken them out of a revenue tier with their primary carrier, and it would have ended up costing them about $6 million, which was missed in the consulting engagement they were working on, but found through our technology. So, what I'd say is, that kind of brand promise really matters. It's just got to be managed against the agreements that are negotiated and really factored into the negotiation process, understanding that.
Well, and that's a huge number. I was hosting a panel discussion about a month or so ago, and they were also talking about customer retention, actually getting those customers to buy from you. And that transit time, that delivery time is really, really important to whether they're actually going to press that buy button or not. So you make some really good points there. Now, Chad, I want to bring you into the conversation and talk a little bit about some examples. Paint us a picture of successful negotiation strategies tailored to the retail and apparel sector that have resulted in improved shipping efficiency.
Yeah, and kind of going off what Michael and you just touched on, Sarah, the customer experience. So over the recent years, we've seen a shift from that single sourcing model from some brands to, a more diversified carrier approach. And, that's not only helped from a pricing standpoint, but also an efficiency or a customer experience standpoint. For example, I ordered something, over a weekend with Nordstrom, and typically, if it's free ground shipping, it would come, later in that week. But now, because of how they diversified their carrier mix, it was shipped out on a Sunday. So they picked it up on a Sunday, a carrier, and it was actually delivered on a ground network on a Monday through T-Force. And so that customer experience is, elevated from that. And then also from a pricing standpoint, it was a more cost-effective way for them to ship than shipping with a national carrier. So that's helped quite a bit from that. And then another one, Faraday, for example, one of our clients, they've made a transition from shipping from a couple DCs throughout the country to shipping from store. And so for making that transition, that also shortens the transit times that you guys both touched on and heightens that client experience as well as reduces cost. So it's not all about just negotiating the best discounts, but it's also about looking at it from a holistic perspective on how to optimize your carrier mix.
Well, and sort of that omni-channel approach, right? You've got stores that you can pick up and deliver from. You've got distribution facilities, and which one is closer to the client that could potentially, help optimize what you're talking to your carriers about, and especially when it comes to costs. Now, let's talk about optimizing those carrier agreements, because I think there's some unique challenges that retailers and apparel companies face when they look at optimizing those carrier agreements. How can they overcome some of those?
Yeah, so kind of going off of what I talked about earlier, I mean, unfortunately, when you're shipping direct to consumer, there's a lot of accessorials to combat in those agreements. And when we look at the numbers, we're seeing out of a total, shipment cost, accessorials make up over 30%, sometimes up to 40% of the total cost. And those were like what I mentioned earlier, the residential delivery area, even oversize and additional handling, because we have some furniture companies that ship big, bulky products. And so being able to, really pay attention, understand where your spend is going in those categories to address those directly with the carrier is really important. And then also for companies and brands that are shipping lightweight product, they also have to worry about these price floors that are put in these contracts, meaning you can try and negotiate better discounts if you want, but ultimately it'll be a futile effort because you're going to hit that price floor, meaning if it's set at $7, it's $7. And so not just addressing all the different surcharges, but also addressing those minimum charge amounts, because that's where companies really sometimes miss those savings opportunities that we see just in meeting with companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to let everybody know we are close to the Q&A. We've got a couple more questions for Michael and Chad. So if you have any questions for Chad or Michael, make sure to put them in the Q&A box. So Michael, it's back to you. What role does, and now we're going to get into data, and I feel like I'm talking about data all the time in supply chain. What role does data analysis play in identifying opportunities for optimizing carrier agreements?
Yeah. Well, I mean, data analysis is everything, right? I mean, a company has to be able to kind of fully wrap their arms around the data and really understand all of what we call the vital factors at Reveel, or really just KPIs, in order to truly optimize. And we've talked about a few of those here, right? Fulfilling by service level. Chad just mentioned the price floors called minimums, zone, weight, right? Surcharges. Those are the vital factors, right? That a company really needs to focus on. But those really only matter if they're actionable, right? And so for so many companies that we work with, the biggest challenge they've had prior to working with us is just getting to the point where they can do the analysis, right? Mm-hmm. Data analysis is one thing, but there's so much you have to do upstream, right? And if I could do a flash poll, I'd be really curious how many people on the call would resonate with, kind of some of the things I'm going to share, right? But one of the biggest issues that shippers face is just the data is coming from so many sources, right? Mm-hmm. And especially in a world with complexity like what Chad just mentioned, right? I mean, if a shipper is fulfilling direct to consumer, right, from maybe it's just one warehouse, maybe there's a multinodal distribution center in East Coast, West Coast, maybe there's more fulfillment centers, maybe there's a ship from store strategy. There could be drop ship vendors in the mix, right, on an e-com marketplace. There could be a wholesale fulfillment. So, and then there's, inbound vendor, supply vendor shipments. So there's so many sources to manage the data from, let alone your warehouse, your TMS, your rate shopping engine, that by the time you get the carrier billing data, it's like, well, if I'm going to understand the full story, I've got to marry it together with so many different sources. And once you do that, you realize, well, the data isn't clean, right? It needs to be scrubbed. Mm-hmm. It's challenging to compare apples to apples across carriers because, FedEx and UPS and DHL and the Postal Service, they all have kind of different products, or even when they have very similar products, they're called different things. The surcharges are different. So there's complexity there. And then even if you can overcome all of those issues, right, the data often still doesn't have the right elements to align to a business's KPIs, right? Because at the end of the day, every single business is trying to tell a story that aligns with, their business strategy, their desired business outcomes. And so if you're trying to report on different different data elements that are going to be critical to your business, but those aren't data elements that are actually captured in the carrier billing data or in these other systems of record, well, right. Now you've got all of this data, you can't make sense of it. So what is, there are so many companies probably on this call, but from our experience, who they're still managing a library of Excel spreadsheets and are just spending dozens of hours every month getting the data to a place where they can start to make use of it in order to optimize their carrier program. And so what I would want anyone on the call right now who resonates with any of that to know that there is a better way. We'll talk about that more later in the discussion. But certainly that's, still a common experience and challenge of shippers everywhere.
Well, and if you can manage that data and make sure you have the right data in place, it really enhances the conversations that you're having with the carriers, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, go ahead. Go ahead. I could expand on that a little if you'd like me to.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, carriers are viewing any shipper's program in the same way that we just described, right? I mean, they're looking at service levels, surcharges, weights and box sizes. They're looking at, minimums, like Chad said, looking at zone, then they're looking at delivery commitment, right? And so for any shipper to really have a chance at optimizing and crafting a really smart network strategy, you've got to understand your data at the same level or better than the carriers are understanding your data, right? And It's really interesting because a lot of times, we have customers who they'll have their quarterly business reviews with their carriers, and they're getting data, they're relying on data from the carriers, right, to report out on a lot of metrics. But really, you need kind of an independent source of data that you can really compare and really have those accountable vendor conversations with your carriers. You can only do that if you've got visibility to the same data elements that they do.
Yeah, well, and the trust and reliability as well is really important, to be able to trust the data that you're bringing to the table and really be able to back that up so that you can have those conversations. So Chad, I want to bring you back into the conversation. How do trends in e-commerce and omni-channel retailing impact the monitoring of carrier agreements for retail and fashion businesses? Because it's not easy. I mean, it's one of the things that we're talking about today, right? You really need to have a technology partner to be able to help manage through all of these. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, Michael touched on this a little bit earlier with the agreement monitoring feature. But as brands look to diversify the carrier mix, it's very important to actively manage those revenue or volume commitments that they have in those carrier agreements, because we've seen countless times where companies start to diversify and they have these commitments set with one of their primary national carriers that they start to fall out of revenue bands. And in doing so, that can be a significant cost, because typically how those agreements are structured is as you drop bands, it can be a much significant number compared to as you jump up into a higher band. And so it's really important that they pay close attention to that. So we really advise companies to actively manage those agreements. And if they don't have the time or bandwidth to do that on their own, they can leverage a technology like Reveel and our agreement monitoring feature to do that for them.
Amazing. So Michael, can you share some of the best practices for integrating transportation finance considerations into the negotiation, monitoring, maybe the optimization of carrier agreements for retail and apparel companies?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, finance is really one of my favorite topics to discuss in transportation, because it's
Everybody
really
loves it.
well, that's not something I hear very often, actually.
I know.
But it's really the job of any company's CFO and really the entire finance organization to tell the story of their business using the numbers, right? I mean, that's the key role and function, or one of the key roles and functions for CFOs. And so for so many years, the most challenging problem has been around timeliness and really the accuracy of the data, right? I mean, there's delays in carrier billing, carriers adjust their bills. There's no real-time visibility. So there's challenges, similar to what we talked about, a few minutes ago, in terms of kind of how finance organizations get their data. But, finance is so important because when they're included in the right way in kind of network strategy, then they're able to tell the other stakeholders who are so critical to that network strategy how they're actually meeting their business objectives, right? And what I mean by that is, typically there's kind of four categories of stakeholders, right? And probably represented on this discussion, right? You've got executive leadership, operations, procurement, and finance, right? Procurement's concerned with vendor selection and cost containment. Executive leadership concerned with the organizational objectives. Ops is concerned with fulfilling the promise. Finance are the ones who can really tell the story, right? If they're empowered to, and help ensure that all of those other stakeholders and components of the organization are really able to execute the organizational strategy. And so, we always try to include transportation finance stakeholders in day one of an implementation with our solution. And some of the things that we work with those stakeholders on to kind of build what we would call, a fully integrated best practice solution is number one, data transformation, right? Helping to ensure that the data that we're building in repeatable rules in the data sets so that they can tell the story of their business in a way that aligns with their business needs. So that's one. In line with that, number two would be general ledger coding automation, right? Mm-hmm. Really, again, telling the story of the business with kind of where your spend is going, which I would encourage companies don't do that on an account basis, right? A lot of companies have really complex account structures with their carriers that they use to do their general ledger coding. And ultimately, there can become non-compliance and even fraudulent use of accounts that then is really undetectable if general ledger coding is happening at an account level. So that's number two. Number three would be accrual reporting automation, which can really happen in real time for finance organizations now. One of the really key problems that we help finance organizations solve. Number four would be systems integration, kind of tying together all of those disparate supply chain data systems we talked about. And then number five would be customized reporting and analytics requirements for transportation finance teams. So those are kind of the five best practices we partner with finance organizations to really enable their objective, which again is tell the story of their business to empower the other stakeholders in their organizations.
Well, and it's smart, and it's a good thing that we're recording this because that was such great information, but we went through that quite quickly, all of those 5 elements of best practices. Thank you so much, Michael. Now it's the time to go to audience questions. And so if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A box because we definitely want to make sure that we get to your questions. Now, Michael, one of the questions that have come from the audience is, are there ways to make our shipping more eco-friendly without spending too much? That is such a great question.
That is a great question. And it's a great question because it's actually a fun one to answer because honestly, the most eco-friendly options are the cost-saving options, right? There are a few strategies that our customers have been able to employ by leveraging good data and then achieving kind of both objectives. One would be optimizing service level utilization by shifting air or express parcel volume to ground. Okay. You need really good data in order to do that, right? Because what you don't want to have happen, I mean, anyone can downgrade express shipments to ground, but typically you're going to sacrifice transit performance, right? Sometimes that's okay, but most of the time you want to make sure you're maintaining the same level of on-time delivery and the same transit performance to your customers. So if you have the data to say, okay, in these regions or on these lanes, we could achieve the same transit performance, but downgrade our service from air to express or move from one carrier to another. If you've got that data, then you can eliminate the majority of carbon emissions while simultaneously cutting your costs because the majority of carbon emissions occur through air transport. Now, number two would be reducing your box sizes and packaging, right? So if you're able to eliminate materials waste while also cutting down on the impact of dimensional weighting, I think you brought that up earlier, Sarah. You mentioned the impact of like oversized charges and unauthorized charges. I mean, there can be huge waste in transportation spend associated with dimensional weighting. And for a lot of companies, it's just evaluating really at a product level, okay, where are we getting those charges? Is it because there's kind of suboptimal packaging usage? And if there is, well, we can achieve 2 objectives. One, we can eliminate those surcharges or reduce our billable weight, and at the same time, eliminate the use of raw materials that we don't need to. So that's number 2. And then 3 would be really around more like inventory optimization, right? So if you can understand split orders, for example, maybe you have customer orders that are being fulfilled from different distribution centers. That obviously increases packaging, but it also increases carbon emissions. And so if you can really understand inventory optimization, then companies can reduce the distance packages travel, they can eliminate packaging, and simultaneously lower the average zone of their packages, which is going to save them costs.
Well, and I go back to that packaging part because it's really part of that brand story. Right? You can use packaging in a variety of different ways to help with your brand story. But I remember receiving, Amazon parcels with something really tiny in it in a huge, huge box. And when your customer sees something like that, your brand credibility kind of goes down, right? Because people want to see that you're thinking about those eco-friendly options as well. So packaging is huge. All right, let's go to a question from Tim. Is your engagement agreement limited to a 3-year gain share? In my experience, come year 3, the gain share outweighs the savings.
Yeah, that's that one. I can answer that. Yeah, Tim, that's a great question. And that's another reason why we pivoted our model, because, going back for the last few decades, that was the pricing model out there in the space, is these 3-year gain share agreements. And at the end of those 3 years, oftentimes customers felt very fatigued from that gain share payment. And we received, that feedback as well. And so we decided to make a change. And also with gain share, we also acknowledge that there's variability in the monthly invoices. So it's really hard for finance teams to budget and forecast accurately to those, because it's based off of your how much you're shipping and how much you're saving is how much you pay on those gain share. And so that also poses a challenge outside of just feeling like you're paying too much. And so what we've done is we've created a new, like, since we've gone that software model, it's more like other software subscriptions that you might be familiar with, where you have that predictable pricing, you know exactly what you're going to spend, and you end up pocketing a lot more of the savings as a result. So that's one of the benefits of technology, is there's a less dependence on human capital. And so as a result, we can deliver the same value props through technology at a more cost-effective method, so that you can, you know, ultimately pocket more of that savings and pay less.
Well, and I think part of that is that you're not paying further into the future than you need to be, right? Is that
yeah,
right?
I mean, that could be one concern, and we'd have to hear directly from Tim to know for sure what he was asking in that specific question itself. But we have experienced that question as well, where they feel like they're okay. We understand maybe the first year, but then why the second year and then a third year? And I think that's just kind of how it started, because we weren't the first consultant when we entered this space in 2006. Like, there was other companies that came before us as consultants. And so we just copied what was in the market, which was that 3-year gain share. But then after a decade of doing that, based off of market feedback, we decided that's just not what customers want anymore. And so we decided to make a pivot. And so that's why I think, Tim, if you want to reach out at another time, we can explain exactly how our pricing model works and how it's so simple to forecast and budget for.
Tim says exactly, Sarah. By the third year, the savings is gone after 2 years of GRI.
Exactly. And some companies will take a more proactive approach to mitigate those GRIs. So with our customers, we're helping like offset that annually through touch-ups on those negotiations, as opposed to, I think there's been some companies in the past that might have created a bad reputation in the space for just doing a negotiation day one and then just sitting back and collecting checks for 3 years. And obviously that would leave a bad taste in anyone's mouth.
Anybody's mouth. All right. We've got another question from the audience. So we struggle to analyze carrier billing data because it doesn't include all the parameters we need to evaluate our shipping network. Are there ways to make shipping analytics, more robust?
Yeah, I can take that one. I'll give the short answer, and then I'll expound upon it a little bit. I mean, I think there are really two answers to that question. One would be data transformation through repeatable rules, and then the second would be systems integration. So really, there's a non-IT answer and then an IT answer, right? The IT answer is a little more complicated, but it's best practice, so I'll start there, right? So, I think the question was framed something like carrier billing data, it doesn't have all the data elements we need, right? And that's true, but very likely within other systems in your organization, those data elements exist, right? Maybe it's in the order data, right? Data about the product, and you're trying to get to like SKU level profitability. Maybe it's from TMS or rate shopping. It's, hey, what were our planned shipment costs? Maybe it's warehouse data, right? What were the package dimensions or the box sizes? So it's very likely that somewhere else that data exists. Tying together that data is something that we do all of the time for our customers. We call it order matching. And when we can do that, right, typically just requires a little bit of IT lift on our customer's end to send us the data, right? Whether it's a push method or an API. And then we can do all of the data matching on our end. And all of a sudden, you're not just using carrier billing data anymore. Now you're using basically all of the data, and you have one single source of truth, right? So that's kind of the answer that requires a little IT involvement. Now, some companies, it's like, hey, that sounds great, but I can't get on my IT team's roadmap for a year and a half because they're focused on other priorities. Like, what's the shorter term answer? And the shorter term answer is, well, we can build in repeatable rules that give you some of those data parameters you need, right? So if it's like, hey, I just need to be able to filter by shipments that are out of a store versus a DC. Great. We can build in repeatable rules that give you that data element. Maybe it's, hey, I get data from my carriers where the addresses are not consistent across carriers or even within a specific carrier. And I need to be able to normalize to understand my profitability by customers or bill back to my customers or whatever the case may be. Well, we can build in repeatable rules for our customers that then allow them to kind of expand their data set, right, through those through those repeatable rules, through data transformation. And even without a systems integration, you can get a lot of value and understand your data at a deeper level. So those are kind of the two answers.
Yeah, really good answers there. So we've got another one from the audience. Can you tell us how big companies handle shipping costs compared to smaller ones?
Yeah, I can take that. Well, I guess to start out, I mean, larger brands, have the benefit of numbers. One, they typically have like a team managing that line item. And two, they'll also typically have resources to acquire numerous different softwares to help efficiently operate or run that line item. And so, whereas some, on smaller brands, typically we've experienced where there's just one person in charge of managing that line item. And sometimes that one person wears a lot of hats in the organization as well. And so they're trying to do a lot of things. And so in those situations, whether it's a large shipper or even a smaller shipper, leveraging technology to help really come alongside and supplement the efforts, we've seen so much value in that. And we've even seen some smaller brands that are operating just as efficiently as some larger brands, just because they're leveraging the correct technologies to get them there. And so regardless of the size, it's so important nowadays to leverage technology.
Yeah, to have that the right technology partner, right, that can really grow with you as well. I think if you're a smaller organization, that really does help. So another question from the audience is, how does data-driven decision-making contribute to parcel spend optimization for retailers specifically? Michael, did you want to answer that one?
Sure. I mean, yeah, honestly, the last point that was made around having the right technology is kind of how I'd answer this one. I think parcel spend optimization it's simple if you have the right technology. I mentioned earlier we focus on what we call vital factors, which are basically the key performance indicators that are kind of the key inputs into shipper's parcel spend. So that's service levels, surcharges, weights and box sizes, minimums or price floors, and then zone. And that has to be balanced with time in transit and on-time performance. But really, for the right technology to provide customers with great parcel spend optimization, there has to be insights coming out of those vital factors that allow a company to kind of operationalize what they see in the data, right? And so, I mean, there are so many good examples of this. We have machine learning algorithms in our data that presents our customers with these insights. But one would be service levels, right? What are the downgradable service options where I could downgrade my service, cut costs, but not sacrifice performance time? That's one. Surcharges. There are so many surcharges that customers or the shippers are receiving where the carrier is billing correctly, right? They're billing correctly according to the service guide, but if the customer made an operational change, they could eliminate those surcharges, right? Address corrections are a really common one. Late fees, late payment fees are another really common one that a lot of shippers don't have visibility to. And then you kind of go down that list, right? Like box size optimization for weight, or understanding your potential unrealized savings with minimums, or reducing your zone through inventory optimization. All of these are really insights that lend towards parcel spend optimization. But again, it's really hard to do this through an analyst, right?
Right.
What you want your analyst doing is not putting together all of the data and scrubbing all of the data to get to a point where you can start to understand these insights. You want your analyst to just have the insight and then be able to go figure out, all right, now how do I operationalize this insight in my business, right? So that's where having the right technology is so key.
Yeah, and lots of great examples there. Now, I want to let you know we are almost to the end of this. So if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A box. Andre says, can you talk about your approach to identifying, leveraging, and negotiating the non-rate items or value-added services in an agreement, i.e. late pickup, payment terms, etc.? Money is left on the table if you don't ask.
You want me to take that? I can take that one.
Go for it.
So there's a lot of companies typically will just focus on the discounts and surcharges and all that stuff that fall into these agreements, but there's a lot of things in the fine print to focus on as well. And so when engaging with a company like us, we'll ask a lot of questions to identify that. We'll also identify that, kind of like Michael had touched on, within the data of what we're seeing. For example, late fees with payment terms, and understanding how often that's occurring and what the financial impact is of that. And then once you identify those like core, components of a contract, then it's about having those conversations with the carrier, which oftentimes we've seen it kind of varies. It's not always about just the buying power, because a lot of times people feel like, okay, because I'm a large brand, I can push back and I can get this, and this just because I'm big. We've seen some really small brands or small shippers that have incredible terms outside of those core because they had those conversations with their carrier rep and just brought it to attention. Sometimes just by like letting the carrier rep know, because ultimately they're going to have to go and make that business case with their pricing department. And so helping educate your carrier rep or that team that's managing your account to make that business case to go back to the pricing department makes all the difference from our experience.
Huge, huge. That's such great advice. Now, we have so much more we could cover, but we've kind of run out of time. So I want to get to the final question. And Michael, I'm going to ask you, what advice do you have for a retail shipper or shipper of any kind who is looking to engage a parcel spend management solution, or maybe transition from their existing solution to a more tech-oriented solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of companies going through exactly that journey today, right? I mean, companies who have maybe used a solution for a period of time, maybe even a solution that's provided, significant value, but are really curious about, what could a more tech-oriented solution do for their business. And so, what I'd encourage anyone kind of going through that journey is, don't take any solution provider's word for it, right? And what I mean by that is, there are a lot of shippers with suboptimal solutions in this space today because they bought into, a PowerPoint or a demo or a convincing personality. What I'd encourage you to do is ask the potential solution provider, prove it, right? Load your data, right? Your shipping data into their software, have them demo your data back to you. And what it should do is it should bring your data to life. It should give you insights and present opportunities to you that really move the needle for your business, right? And if the technology of the vendor you're evaluating can't or won't do that, that's a red flag.
Absolutely. And that's such great advice. Now, we do have one more question from the audience. I think we can sneak it in. So how do you ensure data integrity and quality when dealing with Parcel Select data? Can you discuss your experience with implementing predictive analytic models to forecast parcel delivery times or optimize routing algorithms?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, frankly, to end on. In terms of normalizing, Parcel Select data, there's limited data quality and availability with that service in particular. But what we do with all of our carrier billing data, we have a robust, collection process, normalization process. We ensure that as we integrate to all carrier data, that all of the right data elements are present to really feed all of our data modeling, right? And data modeling is really key. So when you talk about modeling or when you talk about, predictive analytics, I won't necessarily get into the details of how do we do it with Parcel Select versus, other providers, but that's really a key part of our integration and implementation with any carrier billing data.
Amazing. Such great advice. So many great questions. But that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much to all of you watching and listening. And thank you for all the insightful questions. Now, shipping has historically been way too complicated. The data, lack of transparency, the complexity, the technology, it's all been a roadblock to success for shippers. So it's really refreshing to have a brand that knows the problems from both sides and has used that insight to develop solutions that just focus on making things easy. Because when complex processes are made easy, that's when you have the space to strategize, to innovate, and to achieve that all-important competitive advantage. Now, within the next 24 hours, we are going to send you an email that will include the URL to view on demand or share with your colleagues up to 30 days, plus a link to sign up for your free version of the Reveel shipping intelligence platform. And I'm going to be seeing you again soon because you should be signing up today because we're going to have episode 2 where I join Reveel and SupplyChainBrain about a case study on parcel spend transformation coming up June 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Chad and Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, sir.
We'll see you all again soon.